Hello and welcome to Hours of Harvard for May. It is not that late, but it certainly does look it because it is the beginning winter here and things are getting cold and tired and woozy. And I always find this time of year really interesting because the media freakout kind of book tags start to come out on other people's channels. And I don't really do those videos, but I always find it really interesting to watch and see what everyone's goals are for the year and how everyone's doing in their reading journeys. And I'm still kind of chugging along, so I've got these of this month. Actually, I'm forgetting one. These ones to show for my May reading journey, and things are going okay. I'm making it through all my categories, but I also kind of planned to do some really challenging books this year, and I haven't got to any of that just yet. But we'll first talk about Ghost Story by Toby Litt is my something spooky for May, and to be honest, I don't remember this one that well. It starts with this autobiographical section about the narrator's own experiences with his partner's miscarriage, and it's quite tremendously sad. In between the nonfiction, there are these sort of symbolic, metaphorical, magic realist segments about animals and nature and about trying to connect this feeling of really, really human sadness and loss with natural processes, life and death and things like that occur just in the world. And it's a pretty hard and difficult read. The emotions really kind of got to me, and I kind of understood that this section was there to then lead into and foreground the fiction part of this novel. So we follow two characters, their names are Agatha and Patty, and they move into a new house which is somewhat haunted in the kind of Henry James sense, where for the entire text we're not really sure if there is this literal ghost or not, but there is this oppressive feeling. There's noises in the walls, there's unexplainable things, and because these characters also have experienced the loss of a child, they are psychologically in a position to be haunted. And so we find Aggie, who's at home Agatha Aggie, but home by herself, and she's experiencing this haunting, which could still entirely be imaginary or falsehood, or it could be real, but we see how much anguish this causes her when she needs to continue to try and relate to her partner, to her previous child, and to the grandparents of the family. And it's quite a difficult family situation. There are these moments of tension and drama between these forces, and ultimately I just feel really bad for these characters. I just don't know how much I appreciate it as a ghost story. I think there's elements of this where I guess the ghostliness doesn't add to the story as much as I would like it to, because really who I'm feeling for is these characters. And the ghost metaphor is there and it's present, but it also takes away from the reality of this experience, because it makes it a bit harder to say what's real and what's not, and what's happening and what isn't. And it just feels a bit cruel towards Aki. Like, it doesn't fully give her this feeling of real emotion, because there is the potential of a lot of it to have been imaginary or supernatural, and that just makes it for a more difficult reading experience for me. Like, there are some passages in here that just get intensely psychological. Even the dialogue feels inhumanly psychological in a literary sense. Like, it's a literary novel, and I can't really complain about the novel for being what it's trying to be, and yet it didn't really hit the right notes for me that I would have wanted, so I would give it a 3 out of 5. Interesting exploration. I still like ghost stories, and I think this one is successful in the kinds of rhythms and feelings of a ghost story. It does feel spooky and oppressive. It does work, and yet it still kind of leaves me wanting more. So, Book 2 is Love Medicine, and happened to have gotten very sick when I was reading this. Generally, in May is usually the time of the year when I get very sick, and so I was home alone for 2 or 3 days, and I decided to pick up this book, which, the reason why I don't want to read this, it's in my because I didn't want to category, is because the cover is not really something I want to bring on a train with me. So, the cover, I'm still not entirely sure how it relates to the text, because this is a generational epic. It's a series of connected short stories by a Native American author about this Native American family, or two separate families, and their kind of rise and fall throughout American history, and it's just really well done. I quite liked it. So there is a kind of sensation in American letters and creative writing to follow that kind of Hemingway school of small details, low adjectives, very heartfelt and dramatic stories, and that is really kind of what this book is. So it follows all of these characters from these two Native American families, and we do focus on these big dramatic moments of their relationships. But what I quite like is that while the family tree is really complicated, you piece it together through the act of reading it, and you start to learn who the characters and their connections are. And there are moments of revelation too as you read through it, and then you realize, oh, these people are connected in this way, but also they feel this way about that character for this reason. And because it's non-linear, and because these stories kind of refer to each other a lot, you do feel like you know the family a lot better after you read through this, and you also understand just kind of how things happen and then the consequences of those actions towards next generations and generations afterwards. And all of it is revolved around this idea of hurt and healing. So characters are variously hurt through historical circumstances and historical disadvantages and prejudices, and also elements of hurt within American history, like the Vietnam War and like PTSD. And then we see how these ripple effects cause them to try and find healing through all sorts of things, through family, through relationships, through self-medication, through solitude and loneliness, through more tragic means, and through more spiritual means. There's just this sprawling and messy look at the various ways that we can be hurt and the various ways that we can heal one another. And I just think it's so honest and heartfelt the way that it's written. There are some really, truly emotional moments. And what I really love too is that it's not really a book with a lot of stuff that happens. I would say there's maybe 2 or 3 big events. And just to give away one is a house burns down. So a character is kind of trapped in this, not really like a love triangle, but they have powerful love for 2 women. And one day, in his elderly age, he decides to go over to the other woman he's been pining for his whole life. And in that passion, an accident happens and he accidentally burns the house down. So this moment is explored through multiple short stories. I think it shows up in, it's directly referred to or depicted in 2 short stories, and then it also is mentioned in I think another 3 or 4 short stories. So it becomes a centralized moment in these characters' relationships, and lots of different narrators comment on this one situation when you're not really expecting it, but because you know of this event, you then become part of this web of characters. You start to understand it through all these different viewpoints. And you start to understand too why certain characters feel certain ways about other characters, largely because of what they've done or what they think they've done or what they think they're like as a person. I just think it's really complicated and it works really well. All these characters become very well fleshed out and very enriched. I'm reading an edition that is expanded from the original, and I think since this copy it was expanded further, and I could just keep reading. I think it's just really well done. I think the level of detail that we get to these characters is really quite impressive. The way the author is able to make us feel something for each of them, to make none of them a villain, and yet so much hurt and so much healing happens in this book, is really quite tremendous. So I would give it a 5 out of 5. I do like reading it. It is still a, at times, harrowing book. It's quite a challenging read, but out of all the kind of family generational sagas that come out of this period of history, and I honestly wanted to compare it to something like 100 Years of Solitude, the same kind of rise and fall of a large family, I liked this one more. I think I connect with the characters more. It has less of those fantastical elements, of course. Like, I wouldn't call this magic realism, but there are moments of happenstance that feel improbable and yet do occur in order to create more drama in the story. And I pay it all. I think that, like, all of those moments deserve to be here, and they accentuate the story. They don't make it feel something. They don't make it feel like something far-fetched or unrealistic. Instead, it creates a more heightened realism for these characters to see them in these moments of tension. I just think it's done quite well, so I would give it a 5 out of 5. And while I was sick, I also read Measure for Measure by Shakespeare. So this is a Shakespearean comedy and or tragedy. It's really hard to weigh this play out, because on one hand, it's this bizarre, raunchy sex comedy about a city, well, it's set in Vienna. It's set in the city where morally sexual promiscuity is common, and we have characters who are visiting prostitutes, we have characters who are having children out of wedlock, and suddenly the Duke puts a person in charge. So the Duke kind of just dashes away and leaves, and then disguises himself and comes back to the city as a friar, just kind of see what things are like. And he puts Angelo in charge, and Angelo is this morally Puritan-ish character. And so he decides to start punishing people for their sexual promiscuity, and this is part of the Duke's plan, because the Duke, in this really interesting monologue, is talking about how his rule is seen as a bit lax, and he wants to fix that, but he doesn't want to change his own attitude towards justice, and he doesn't want the people to start suddenly thinking, oh wow, this guy is like flip-flopping. And so he's decided to put Angelo in charge because he knows that Angelo will take this role, and to start punishing people for that period kind of moral transgressions. And once people start to see that their actions have consequences, they'll naturally fall in line with the Duke and come back. So this is this crazy gambit that results in two characters, or one character, being sentenced to death. And this entire time we have his sister Isabella trying to appeal to Angelo to try and rescue her brother. And yet Angelo immediately falls in love with Isabella. And so he propositions Isabella that if they were to not even like be a relationship, like literally just have sex, right? If she were to give her virginity to Angelo, then Angelo will pardon the brother. And Isabella, of course, is horrified by this, and it's just a terrible situation for everyone. And in some senses, this is really the classic Shakespearean comedy setup, is we have characters that have this problem and are trying to solve it through disguise and deception and lots of sexual escapades that for the Elizabethan era feel quite transgressive and quite energetic in a sense. Like, in imagining a much more morally and sexually conservative time, having a story like this with sexual transgression really everywhere, like it's every single subplot in this play is about this, it feels quite powerful in a sense. And I get that this is one of the less popular plays because no one in their right mind would teach this to a high school class. This is definitely a play about sexual politics, and you cannot talk about it without, in some senses, having a more mature eye towards things, but also being very okay at laughing at some extremely horrible things, like some very, very bad things and threats and tricks and all of these things happen in this text, and in many ways they're played off for laughs because it does lead to a happy ending. Like, it's not a tragedy, people don't die at the end, and the consequences for some very bad things are not really brought to light. And that's one of the things that I don't like as much about the ending of the play, is that after all of this conflict and misunderstanding, I thought it would result in a larger moment of something, and yet it just kind of fizzles out. Like, the Duke arrives back and everything gets sorted. It's just not as powerful as an ending as I would want. But the first act and the establishment of the conflicts are just so fascinating. And I think you could play this as either a really rich and complicated look at governance and morality and how leaders choose to enforce the laws they put in place and the effect this has on individuals, or you could play this as just a completely raunchy, disguised sex comedy. And they don't really go together. Like, I feel like if you play the play in a comedic sense, then it robs the seriousness of the discussions of justice. Whereas if you play this play in a more dramatic sense, then you have all these random scenes where characters getting tricked by prostitutes, and it just doesn't really fit in any of this. So tonally this play is a bit confused, and yet both of the tones make for really entertaining content. So I enjoyed my reading of this. I don't think it's a good play, but I do think it's really worth a read or a watch. But there is definitely some very objectionable stuff in here that I would think a modern production would really, really need to temper. Like, it's not to the same level of something like Taming the Shrew, but it is not good. And so I would give it a 3 out of 5. If you read the play, you'll know what I mean. Like, there's some stuff in there that I'm just like, ugh, I don't know about that one. Book number 4, The Age of Innocence. This is amazing. This is so, so good. So, of the kind of literary classic romances, this book just knocks it straight out of the park. It's like the feeling of yearning in this one is more powerful than really any other of these classic novels that I can name off the top of my head. It beats out The Great Gatsby, it beats out anything by Jane Austen, and I like those books. I think they're really good. And yet, the feeling that I get from reading this is just so well done and so sustained and so real in a way that other things that I've read that I would compare it to just kind of pale in comparison. Like this book like The Great Gatsby, where I understand it, but I also need to kind of contextualize it. I need to think about what people in that historical period might view those interactions to be like. Whereas The Age of Innocence, even though it's set in the 1800s in New York, the feeling of yearning here is so powerful that it feels kind of universal. So we have our main character, Newland Archer, who is engaged to a woman named May Welland, and May is really kind of a perfect wife for this time period. Like, she is from a well-off family, she is really, really good at navigating the social spaces, and Edith Wharton, being a person who was part of that New York aristocracy, but, and I could be wrong, I believe she married into it, and so there were definitely really constraining elements of her life to try and uphold these public displays of wealth and manner and things like that. So these characters do definitely get very constrained by gossip and the way people talk in upclass New York. And we have this marriage of two very powerful families where Archer and May support each other, and they're actually quite good at one another, good for one another, and yet May's cousin, Countess Olenska, is escaping from Europe after just a disastrous marriage to a count. And so she's trying to find her footing back in New York in this environment where people don't respect her, don't invite her to things, don't let her back into the society where she came from. And so our protagonist, Archer, gets enlisted to help with Countess Olenska to try and bring back her reputation, to try and invite her to things, and try and keep her company, just kind of like a favor to May's family, and he just falls head over heels to love her. And this feeling is just done so well, because it's not a lustful love, it's a love that comes from really, really caring for her, because he, having felt this constraints of posh New York society for so long, to see someone struggle against it and to present any kind of alternative to that lifestyle is really delightful for him. It opens a door that he never fathomed existed in his life. And so this love, in a sense, is just a really pure thing. Like, it's a very altruistic love. It's a very socially minded, like, it's so hard to explain. It's not based on possession, right? It's not based on anything that he will gain from getting in a relationship with her, but he has this very pure desire to see her happy. And this, of course, conflicts with his marriage. So it's just a fantastic love triangle where all the characters have a lot of agency, and it's not a book that pits these two female leads against each other and says one choice is right and one choice is wrong. Instead, they're both very, very accomplished people, and they offer Archer a tremendous amount of things, just in different ways. And they're all kind of valid choices. And so Archer is naturally very torn by these two senses of yearning for his love for May, which is on one sense obligational because they are married, but also because she's great. She's so devoted to him, she's so caring, and she's so good at navigating the existing space of New York. And yet Archer is also so in love with Countess Olenska, who is just different, who's just a way out of everything here. And so this feeling of passion is just all the way through the text. All these characters are so complex, and even though it's about posh people, even though it's about really rich people, the novel finds this interesting balance of not just directly destroying this view and not just trashing the place. It does let you feel the kinds of exhilaration that you would feel if you were in these spheres of influence and power. Like, it does make you feel good about that. And yet it does also present this lifestyle as being difficult and constraining and ultimately not very fulfilling as well. So it doesn't celebrate the higher class, but it also isn't spiteful in its reading of it. It just kind of balances all of these things really well. It's really delicate, it's just well constructed, it has really, really well constructed scenes as well, like you really feel like you're there. I just can't fault it at all. I think it's a 5 out of 5. I think it's a really, really good classic text. I don't know if I would call it the most accessible, just because I think I've read enough of these older works that a long sentence is not really going to faze me anymore. I think if I was just starting out with classics, I don't know if I would feel the same that I do for this one. And yet it's just such a powerful book for me. I think it's just so well structured, it's so well done. It makes a very historic moment into a really universal theme and idea. I just think that there's not really anything quite like it so far. I would love to read more of Edith Wharton. I've just read Ethan Frome before, and I'm not as big of a fan of that one. I think that one is, because of its length, a bit more blunt in terms of its themes, whereas this one you really, really just stew in that sense of yearning. It's just such a powerful book. It's just so great. Book number 5, this is Play a Piano by Kurt Vonnegut. This is a book that I wanted to read, and it's Kurt Vonnegut's first novel. It is a science fiction dystopian novel about a society that's basically New York, but in the near future where everything is automated. So workers are not required anymore, really. It's this transitional phase where now that there's this big shift of automation, a large number of society members are no longer required to work. And so the economic impacts of this is that now there's this class of engineers who are able to manage the robots, and they are earning tremendous amounts of money and becoming like gods among men. Like, they're becoming like absolutely in the high life. And the rest of society are just struggling more and more that there's no jobs for them. And I wanted to read it because I just think the premise is so prescient for exactly the world that we're living in right now. And Kurt Vonnegut, as a writer who was very respected for being able to be kind of quite funny and quite scary at the same time in terms of science fiction antics, really, I trusted him. And he didn't deliver. Okay, so I can't be too harsh, but this is his first novel. And this is written in 1952. So the automation that this novel is talking about is like dishwashers, is like telephones, televisions, right? It's like older forms of technology that, yes, did change the way that life was in the time, but it was really not the same kind of automation that we're seeing today in terms of AI, or in terms of like truly losing jobs out to mechanical automation. It is the same problem, but we're facing it at a much more different magnitude. And Play a Piano, I think, looking into that immediate future, gets a lot of things right, but doesn't hit the feeling that I would really want. So I really wondered if this book could show something about our current society, even if it got the guesses wrong, if it could just show more of that social dynamic. And I just don't think it quite lands, because the world has just changed too much and too fast, that some of the ideas that are espoused here feel a bit shallow and a bit plain by comparison. And I think that maybe Vonnegut was not as confident of a writer when he was just starting out, because plot-wise, it is quite derivative of the kinds of science fiction and dystopian text that we're seeing from the time. It feels very much like 1984 and Brave New World, in quite a bad way, because the plot structure, I mean, it follows an everyman, which to me is just not as interesting as anything else that you could do. It follows that same kind of up and down and back up again plot that is a bit more familiar, and the stakes to me just don't really feel that high as well, because we have this everyman character, just don't really care about him that much. We follow Paul Proteus, who is this engineer, and he makes this trip into Ilium and then into the area where I guess the last of the vestiges of laborers work. And so he goes to a bar there, and he's talking to people, and he starts to have second thoughts about his role in high society. At the same time, his company is having this big conference, and so there's this big inside job about what does it mean to be part of the ruling class, and what does it mean to be part of the laborer class, and what will happen when the laborer class is slowly being replaced by machines, and there's really no social support to help people who have lost their jobs and have very little purpose in society. There is, though, this interesting play. So at his company meeting, they have this propaganda play, and it really is just laid out exactly like a theatrical production with like stage directions and everything. And it does kind of approach this sense of class disparity. I think the satire of the play is quite pointed. It's about this question of, is it right for certain people to become so much more rich and so much more powerful than other parts of society, and for the average wage and the average cost of living assessment to go down, if it means that for wider society we get technological advancements, we get automatic things, dishwashers, cars, and televisions, and for us, Amazon and ChatGPT, is it worth it? And of course there's novels, like, it's so obviously no. And so because we're living in the problem that this novel is trying to foresee, it just doesn't mean anything to me. I had a bit of trouble engaging with this and finding it compelling. And I also think that the rapid fire and really self-referential style that Vonnegut would develop in his later life is not quite as present here. Like, you can kind of see glimpses of it, but I also wouldn't suggest this novel to anybody unless they want to see the early parts of Vonnegut's career and see the way that he evolves his style. So I would give it a 3 out of 5. I will probably eventually read all the Vonnegut novels. I do quite enjoy his work, but maybe not this one to be one of the best ones. Love and Virtue is my light reading. So I mentioned to my friends that when I read The Scope of Permissibility last year, I loved that book for its representation of Australian uni life and Australian campus life. And I said, I wish there were more Australian campus novels. I wish the novels more set on universities that fit the Australian rhythm of university life versus American college life, because there are so many American college novels, there are so many like English university novels. There's not really like a Sydney university novel. And so Love and Virtue is that. It's about the college system at Sydney University, and it does have a lot of those cultural monikers of Sydney University. It has Thai food on King Street at Newtown. It has lunch at Ralph's. It has philosophy lectures in old buildings. It's just kind of all the same things that you would expect out of uni life here, and yet it is this very salacious drama. It's reading it to me reminds me of something like those old dramas that we would see on TV, like Gossip Girl or One Tree Hill or whatever. I don't know them very well, but it feels like that kind of thing where every chapter or every moment or every scene, we're getting more drama into these characters. We follow Michaela, who is 18, and she has won this scholarship into Fairfax, which is this women's only college, and they have all these drunken parties with St. Thomas, which is the boys' college. It's not stereotypically like college parties the way we would see American college parties, and that's one of the things that this book gets right, is that very few people live on campus, university in Sydney, and the people who do are part of this more elite society of student who either can afford to go to the colleges or have some kind of familial connection to the colleges. And it's interesting that we have Michaela, who is really this outsider to the scene, experiencing what it's like to have friends who are all very rich and powerful, who are children of some of the most powerful people in Sydney, and whose life is basically guaranteed for them because they're there to study at university to basically pay lip service. Like, education for them is not a way out of disadvantage. Education for them is just a thing that they do to get a degree to then go do the job that they were always going to get because they always had connections. And so we have these really obnoxious characters who just kind of passing the time by getting drunk and playing games and messing with one another, having a lot of sex, and none of it's portrayed as particularly enjoyable, which, fair. Like, it's not, how do I say this? University is an enjoyable part of your life, but the hollowness and shallowness is more on display here. It's definitely much more interested in critiquing this lifestyle than it is in presenting it as that fun thing that you do for a while and then leave behind. So at its core, we have two relationships. We have our narrative's relationship with a woman called Eve, and Eve is a passionate and outspoken and bold person who is also at the College of Fairfax, but she is interested in social justice and interested in changing the attitudes towards alcohol and sexual assault on the colleges, which, good, of course. But the novel's really critiquing these methods of university activism and how Eve manages to be this performative character in a sense. Like, it treads a really fine line, because I have met people like this, and I do really respect how bold it is to try and enact change in a very old institution like the University of Sydney. I think it's an interesting plotline. And so we have Michaela, who's very much a mediating force, and it presents Eve as a character who you don't want to be entirely, and it's quite conflicted in that sense, and I don't really know how I feel about that. But there are moments where Michaela and Eve have genuine friendship, and I wish I saw more of that before then the novel starts to tear at this connection and to make us question whether or not we like Eve or think she's a good person. I think it would have been much more interesting to have a strong relationship or friendship first, and then show how each character kind of drifts apart as things go on. But while this is happening, we have the other plot, which is Michaela gets in a relationship with a professor who is in his late 30s. His name's Paul. He teaches philosophy. Nothing about this is a good thing. And to me, maybe it's just the friends that I had when I was at university. Nothing like this really happened to the people I know, and I guess it's definitely something that you would keep under wraps and you would keep hidden. But to me, it feels like drama on the university campus that's beyond what most people would experience. And so as I'm reading about this relationship, there's no good way it can end. There's no good way it can continue. Like, every scene where it's happening, I just feel bad for Michaela. And even as Paul is not... It's hard to say. Because the book doesn't present him overtly as a villain or a predator, but he is definitely those things. Like, a reasonable person in this situation would just not take a step in this direction, would not go anywhere near as far as Paul does in this novel. And yet, it happens. And I just spend the whole time reading these sections thinking, oh, like, just, oh. Like, I don't want to diminish the experience of people who have gone through this, because it's awful. It's really horrible. And I appreciate this novel kind of talks about it and shows it in a way that's more complex than just this person is a monster and everything he does is bad. But it is, though. Like, that's what I get from it, is that we're in these really bad situations that should not happen. What do we do about it? And so perhaps the problem was with me, and what I wanted was a book set on a university campus in Sydney that did have some of these fun moments. Whereas what I got is a much more pointed examination of relationship and power dynamics in the university space that feels like... I think the word pointed is what I keep coming back to. Is that's the purpose of the book, is to present this pointed argument about how variously relationships on campus can go very wrong. And a lot of that is rooted in ingrained sexism because of very old institutions. I think all of that works. And I think there's definitely some scenes where the intention to do and say what it's trying to do and say overwhelms my recognition of the university as a real place. And I think the more I say this out loud, the more I'm starting to realize that I want my memory of university to be a particular way. And although like nothing in my life has ever been even slightly as dramatic as what's happening in this book, there are definitely some problematic things that I've done when I was at university that I don't necessarily feel proud about now, and yet I do still want to look back at that time fondly and think, you know what, that was fun. You know, getting drunk with friends was fun. Going out to parties was fun. And maybe I wanted a novel that was fun. And I think the fact that this book is not that. The fact that this book is, I guess, refusing to do that moves my review of it in a direction that was not where I thought I was going to go when I started talking about this book. Oh, that's different, hey? I think the way that I could end this discussion is I could say that I was never part of a college. I didn't go to any events like this, and I was not part of like a private school or any of those like elite echelons where this book's most pointed critiques are directed towards. And I could say, okay, the point has been made, set it aside. Or I can kind of reflect more deeply on what this book is doing for this particular era of university life in Sydney. And I guess it probably prompts a deeper discussion than what I would want to do myself. I'd be more interested in talking about it. I'd be more interested in thinking about it. And in that sense, I'm kind of glad of how much recognition it got. I respect it. I would give it a 4 out of 5. I think normally what I would do is look at things from a more craft side of things. I would look at the construction of the characters. I would look at the prose style, the dialogue, and I'd planned to speak a bit more negatively about each of those things, because I think that there are definitely moments where I thought the dialogue was not as human as I would have liked. There are a lot of moments where I think the pacing of the plot was really quite expansive. There are so many characters for a novel that's not that long. But I think that's not the most worthwhile discussion to be having here, because I think the logical endpoint of that assessment of this book would be then to say, and if those changes were made, it would be that fun campus novel that I wanted, which is not what this is trying to be. So, yeah. What an interesting section. I had to think more. I had to think a lot more about this. That was a long discussion. The last one is a book that I can talk about more quickly because I have nothing to do with it. This is Offshore by Penelope Fitzgerald. It is my Booker Prize winner of May, and it is one of the shortest ones that won the prize. I ran out of time. I was originally going to read one of the longer ones, and I just didn't get to it. So this is a novel about various people living on boats on the riverbank on the Battersea Ridge. And these are characters who are variously outside of London society. So for whatever reason, they're not integrated into general society. We have characters who are holding on to previous failed relationships. We have characters who are engaged in somewhat more underhanded ways of making money. And we get a sense of these characters all kind of care for one another. And it's a community that works, in a sense. But it's also a community which is not mainstream, is not agreeing with what you would expect city and society life to be like. And it's also not really stable. So we have characters wanting to rejoin parts of life on the land. We have characters who live in really unstable circumstances because living on a boat is quite dangerous, and because the Thames also is a tidal river, there are ups and downs and unexpected weather circumstances that just makes this not the most ideal way of living. And we feel that the author brings us real lived experience of being in this kind of liminal space. I find it really interesting, and I think these characters just really well developed. Their desires and their relationships are well constructed, and it reminds me that if you've got a book with interesting characters, then it is compelling to read anything that happens to them. Like, it doesn't really matter what happens to them, because if I'm invested in the characters, then any event is going to be interesting to me. And I think this novel succeeds in doing that, because around page 50, I was like, I'm on for the ride. Like, I don't really know where this is going, and I don't really know if I would even say this novel has a plot, per se. Like, things happen, but it really isn't A happened, so then B happened, so C happened kind of thing. A bunch of stuff happens to these characters, and we learn more about who they are and how they're connected and disconnected to the land. And it's just interesting to read. It's just well-constructed, interesting to read. I would give it a 4 out of 5. It's quite a successful Booker Prize winner, and I do like the fact that if it weren't for this prize, I would never have read this. I would never have thought about this book, ever. And yet, there are things about it that I have not seen in any other book I've read so far. I really like the setting, I really like the characters, I really like the kind of empathic view it has towards people who, I guess, aren't really in this mainstream of society, and yet still have so much to offer and still have such interesting interior lives. It just creates empathy, and that's really all I want out of literary fiction, is to see the world through different people's eyes and to see a part of the world that I normally wouldn't consider, and this book does both quite successfully, so I would give it a 4 out of 5. I feel emotionally exhausted because of Love and Virtue. What is going on with me? Aside from that, that is my 7 books of May. Thank you for joining. Next month, I'm still going to be reviewing books. Nothing on this channel is really going to change. There are some big plans that I had, but with the year going the way that it is, with life being as busy as it is, I just find comfort in reading books, talking about books, following this routine. So that's probably all this is going to be. Thank you for joining. I will see you next time.